Okay, so in the last session, we created a program to select data from database tables and display as output. We have observed both new ABAP syntax using inline declarations and old ABAP syntax. So which we define internal table and work area by using type structures when we are selecting required fields, right? So any questions on that? Hope you have no questions. Okay.
My question is like, are we going to more focus on the S4, like the inline or S4? Uh,
Yeah, we are going to see both new ABAP
okay,
syntaxes as well as existing ABAP syntaxes. So
okay,
first we'll
okay,
see how the existing old ABAP syntaxes will work, and then we'll create another program to replace the same functionality with the new ABAP syntaxes.
okay, got it.
Okay. For the next couple of classes, our focus is on inline declarations. Okay, so in this program, we created a select statement using inline declaration. What is the syntax to use inline declarations? At the rate data, we have to use at the rate data, and here you have to mention if you are selecting multiple records, then internal table, right? Or you are selecting single record
Work area name.
or carrier name,
Work area.
right? Let me show you something. Now tell me, now is it a work area or internal table?
Internal table, sir.
This one.
Internal table, sir.
Internal
We
table,
have
sir.
Okay.
uh,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Good
internal
observation.
table name as work area table name.
Sorry.
We have given internal table name as
Hmm.
work area
Yes.
table
Work
name.
area name. So it is just a naming convention. You have given WA underscore data. That doesn't mean that it's a work area, right?
It's
Name can
into
be
table.
anything. So here, what is the syntax? You are selecting into table. Into table means what? You are selecting
For
data
internal
into
table.
internal table.
Internal table.
Whatever the name you give here, it will create that as a internal table. Okay, you guys will confuse. Like if you give WA, it will act as work area. They think that. No, right? Name can be anything. It is this is the name what we are assigning. This name can be anything. Only depends on the syntax. Depends on the syntax. It will define it as internal table or work area. Okay.
So what is the syntax for inserting into work area in this case?
Yeah. Let's see that. Let's create a program to select data into work area. So in which case we go for work area?
For a single record.
So we use work area when we need to select a single record. Create the program. Okay, let's take this example, this our custom table example. So I want to select only one employee ID. I want to select only one record of one particular employee ID. For that reason, I am taking employee ID as input. Type is this data element. I will select only few required fields. So here, what is my input? Employee ID, right?
Employee ID.
If I enter employee ID in this table, how many records I can expect?
One record.
Only one single record.
Only one single record because employee ID is the primary key. So I'm clear that I'm going to get only single record. Into define work area data of WA underscore where MPID
Employee ID
equal
to
to escape sign
At the rate
P underscore employee
employee.
ID. If SY hyphen equal to 0 and if what is
say
missing
select
here?
single.
What
Select
is this
single.
error? Yes, select single is missing. We are not using into table, right? So since we are not using into table, it is automatically finding that we are trying to select a single record, but we are not using select single. Okay. If you keep into table, it will work. It will consider it as a internal table, right?
Sir, but in the CL demo output, we have to give internal table name.
Anything. I told you, right? You can pass any value, whatever you want to display as output. That can be variable, work area, or internal table. It will take any value as input and just display it as output. Okay. Maintain selection text. Execute. So enter some employee ID. Right. Let's debug this. Keep the breakpoint. Enter the value. Go to desktop 3. So this is the work area. It is defined using inline declaration. Press F5 sub RC0, then displaying the output using that method. Is everyone clear?
Yes, sir.
So,
Now we'll focus on the validations part. So in the last session, what I've told you, like when you are creating the program, what are the different sections of the program? We need to focus. Selection screen design. And what is the next part we need to focus?
Validating
Validations and
business logic.
business logic, right? So in our case, selection screen design is completed, right?
Yes, sir.
Next part is validations. So why we use these validations? To make sure the user is providing a valid input before going to execute business logic. We need to make sure the user is providing a valid input. So we have to make sure to execute the business logic if the user entered only the valid selection screen inputs. If there is any error, what we need to do? We need to notify the error about invalid entry, right? What is the default validation we have observed? One validation we have already applied. What is that? Using obligatory, we made this employee ID as a mandatory input, right? Execute. It is validating the input. It is not allowing the user to execute the program without providing any input, right? Let's see what are different types of validations. How to notify the user about incorrect values? Using error messages, right? Here a default error message is displaying, right, to enter the correct value. So what type of messages we use to notify the user about incorrect values? Error messages. So how to write the validations? For that we have to use first we need to go through events, events of the program. What is the event we use to validate the selection screen inputs?
At selection screen.
at selection screen event. What is initialization event? This is to provide default values. Which values?
Default values.
Default values to the selection screen parameters. So this is the event that we use to pass default values to the selection screen parameters or selection screen inputs. What is the next event? At selection screen. So what is the use of this set selection screen event? So at selection screen event is used to validate selection screen inputs and display relevant error message to notify the user about incorrect entry. So that is the event we use for selection screen input validations. What is the next event? Start of selection. So what is the use of the start of selection? To implement the business logic.
Business.
So by using these events, we are separating report program into different blocks. Okay, one is default values, validations, and business logic.
Sir, for the parameters, we use default keyword, no, sir, to
I'll explain
use.
like why we need a separate event. There is a specific functionality we cannot achieve in a default keyword.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay, sir.
we'll see that with the example. So we are calling it as report program, right? What is a report program? What is a report? In general, what is a report?
Uh,
It's a very regular or very general word, right? Report.
yeah, sir. Report means uh,
The overall function, how it's work.
Okay, maybe report is something which we organize data in a proper order, right? With some proper formatting and in some proper order. We organize the data in that report, right? So here also in reports, we organize the data in proper manner and display as output. Input. For that we use these programs called report programs. So in that, what are the events we are using to achieve specific functionality in the reports, or to divide this program into different blocks of functionality. So initialization, at selection screen, start of selection, and there is one more event, end of selection. Usually we use this event to display the output. So in end of selection, we display the output. So we, as of now, we are not using any of these events. We just created the program without using events. Going forward, we'll be using these events. The sequence of the events are very important. So you have to maintain events in the same sequence. If you don't have any selection screen validations, you can skip at selection screen. Or if you are not using any default values, you may not needed to use a initialization event, right? But if you are using these events, this order is important. Okay, clear? Is everyone clear?
Yes, sir.
Let's create a program using selection screen, sorry, events, and in that events we implement selection screen validations as well. Excuse me. Now, what should be the first event as per the sequence? Initialization. What is the use of initialization?
Validate the selection screen input.
Validation.
No, sir. Default values to the selection screen.
It's not validation, right?
Yeah.
What is the next event?
At selection screen.
At selection screen. What is the use of the set selection screen?
Validate the selection input. Screen inputs.
Validate the selection screen inputs. What is the next event?
Start of selection.
Start of selection. This is to write our
To
business logic,
implement
whatever the
Yeah,
data selection
implement the
logic,
business logic.
whatever the data selection logic we need, we have to implement here.
to display output.
There are few other events which we can see after some time, like they are not required now. Okay, now let's create, uh, let's take some table. Do you have date of join here? Yes. Let's take date of join as input and we'll select the data. Take the data element. First check the selection screen, activate it. think we have to maintain. Now I have a requirement to display default date, some default date. For example, current system date. If you are executing the program today, it should automatically populate today's date. How can we use that? Default.
Default.
What is the system
SY
variable?
SY datum.
SY
SY
datum.
hyphen
System datum.
data. Activate. It is displaying current system date, right? But my requirement is if I am executing today, it should display yesterday's date, previous day date as a default date. But how can you achieve that?
-1.
If you use
Minus
minus
one.
one, yes. If you use minus one, it should be yesterday's date. But here, as per the syntax, it won't accept you to do calculations in the default statement. You cannot do any calculations in a default keyword. You can only use fixed values. Okay, you can only use fixed values. You cannot do any calculated values. You cannot pass any calculated values as input here. For that reason, here we cannot achieve this using a default keyword. So to populate this kind of calculated values or any default value, we have a event. What is that event? Initialization event. So it will populate the default values. When this initialization event will execute? Before displaying the selection screen. Okay, this event will execute before displaying the selection screen and populate the default values as inputs. How to populate the default values? P underscore doj, this is the parameter, right? Equal to sy hyphen datum minus 1, right? Now check selection screen. It is populating, right? Yesterday's date. So these kind of calculated values you can populate here in initialization. You can also write select statements to populate the date, right? Like this. Select single doj. It doesn't make any sense, but I'm just showing you as an example from zdemo employee into, or we are already having parameter, right? We'll select data into parameter itself. When we have when there is a variable work area internal table already defined and you are selecting data into that using inline declarations, how you need to do that? Just use at the date escape sign p underscore doj. Why we are doing like this? Why we are not using data statement?
Advanced.
Why we are not using data statement here? At the date data. At the rate data of why we are not using it? Because this parameter is already defined, right? We don't need to define again. That's why we are not using at the rate data statement. Okay, I'm commenting this value. Let's see how how it will select from the table and populate it. I'll keep a breakpoint here. Execute. Go to desktop 3. So I'm not passing any input. F5. So it is selecting the first available data of join from the table and populating as the default value. So here how are you able to pass the default value? Using a select statement into parameter, right? So you can also write a parameter in initialization events, right? You can also use select statements in initialization events. Is everyone clear on the initialization event?
Yes, sir.
If you don't want to pass any default values, just don't use the initialization. Okay, clear? Now let's keep it as it is. Now let's go to at selection screen event. So what is the use of at selection screen event?
To validate the inputs.
Validate the inputs. How many ways we can validate a input? What are the different ways to validate the input? First possibility, check is there any value provided or not. That means if it is blank, we have to raise a error. If it is a mandatory parameter, if it is a mandatory input. What is the first way of validating? We need to check whether there is at least one value entered by the user or not. Let's say user entered something. Should we accept that?
No, sir.
No, right? No, right? We have to validate whether that value is a proper input or not. What we need to do? We need to validate the value entered by the user. How can you validate the value? How can you validate the value? How can you check? How can you validate the first possibility, first way? We can check
Sub is equal to 0.
not sub RC. We can use if statement. If p underscore doj is not initial or initial, we can do that. Let's see the first way of validation. Net selection screen. If p underscore doj is initial, please observe carefully, is initial. What do you mean by is initial? Empty.
T.
What is not initial? It is not empty. There is some value. Please observe the difference. Is not initial means there is some value. It is not empty. Is initial means it is empty. If it is empty, if there is no value, okay, then what we need to do? If user did not enter any value and trying to execute. So when this at selection screen event, at selection screen event will execute, will trigger after executing the program. After entering the selection screen inputs and click on execute, it will trigger. When the initialization will trigger, even before displaying the selection screen. If p underscore doj is initial, what we need to do? Let's assume it as a mandatory input. Then what we need to do? User did not enter any value and trying to execute it. We should display a error message, right? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
We can achieve that using obligatory, right? Made it obligatory. Now execute the program. I can also achieve that using a obligatory keyword. But why we need to use a separate event? Here you can display customized out messages. The specific message what you want to display in the selection screen when there is no value. But here if you see this obligatory, it will always display the standard error message. But if you want to pass a clear error message, you can define that error message in a at selection screen event. Also, we cannot validate the value using obligatory. It will just check is there any value entered by the user or not. It is not validating the value. It will just check is there any value available or not. That's it. Right? But if you want to validate the value, we need to use a at selection screen event. Let's say now we'll see. I'll remove the obligatory. If there is no value, what we need to do? We need to display the error message, right? How to display messages? For that, we have a keyword
Right statement.
message. Right statement is to display the output, not to display the messages. What is the right statement? To
Is
display
easy
the
to display
output.
output.
To display the output in the output screen. But messages are different. Messages are used to notify the user about a specific status. It is just to notify the user about the status of the program, right? It is not to display the
Oh,
output. Clear? Message, provide the message, enter, date of join. What type of message you want to display? Success message, error message, or information message. There are different types of messages. Success, error, information, warning. In a separate session, we can see all these different messages and observe the difference. What is the type we need to use? What type of error message it is? What type of message it is?
error
It's
message.
a error, right? We are trying to display error because there is no value entered in date of join. So what is the type we have to use? E. Okay. What is the type? What is the type we have to provide for error messages?
Yes,
E.
sir.
For status messages or success messages, we use yes. For warning, W.
W.
For information, I. So
I.
why we need to use only error messages? Because error messages will stop the program processing. It won't let you execute further. Whenever the error message is raised, right? It won't let you proceed further until the error is resolved, right? But the rest of the messages we can move forward with the next business logic. Okay, but if you are raising the error message, it won't let you execute the business logic until the error is resolved. Execute, execute the program. So it is displaying the error, right? Enter, date of join. Our specific message, whatever the message we have provided here. Is everyone clear? If we use
Yes, sir.
status message instead of error message, I have changed it to yes. Activate it. Just observe the difference. I am executing without entering any value. It will display message like this. It is usually we use this for success scenarios. It won't stop the program processing. If you are using status message, it won't stop the program processing. It will start executing the business logic. Okay. The next type is warning. W. Execute the program and execute. So warning messages will be like this. Next type is information. I. Execute. Not entering any input. This is a information message with a pop-up screen. Okay. If you click on continue, it will proceed further. Clear? There are few other types like abort. Type A. A means abort. Execute. It will raise exception. Okay. And it will terminate the program. That is type A, abort. It will raise a error as well as it will terminate the entire program. Clear? We'll see that in a separate session on messages. For now, we'll use error message. What are the other validations we can do? For example, if data of join is less than sy-datum, that means whenever user enters a date of join that is less than system date, you can raise a relevant error. You can also validate selection screen inputs like this. Okay. This is one type of validation. What is the other type of validation? Validating the value, right? Validating the value, right, entered by the user. Is it a correct value or not? How can you validate the value? For example, we are taking department as input. Department as input. How can you validate the department? Whether it is a correct value or not? Or how can you validate employee ID? Is that a correct employee ID or not?
Uh, by using select, sir,
From where
By
you are going to check?
subarse,
How can you
from
say
the
that?
from the
Eh,
by
table.
subarse,
No, okay. So, for example, user entered something, some employee ID, but how you know that that particular employee ID is a valid employee ID or not?
From the table, sir. We'll check it from the table.
What type of table? Check table, right?
Acceptable, sir.
Check table.
If the value entered by the user is available in corresponding check table, then we can say that is a valid value. Otherwise, invalid value, right? For example, user entered department data. So that department data should be available in corresponding department
Check
check
table.
table. If that is not available, then it is an incorrect value, right? So how can you do that validation? We need to write a select statement, right? We need to write a select statement. What type of select statement? Select single or select?
Select
Select
single, sir.
select
Select
single.
Select
single.
single, because here we have only one value, right? In the parameter. So we need to check the value whatever entered by the user is available in the check table or not. Okay. Here we have date of join, right? Usually we cannot validate dates using check tables. We don't maintain any check tables for dates because date can be any date. Let me write some validation. In next session, I'll see. We'll take different example. Select single doj from zdemo. Let's assume zdemo employee is the check table for the date into. Here we have taken only single field, right? Date of
Yes, sir.
join. Variable is enough, right?
Yes,
Data
sir.
of lv underscore doj and where doj equal to p underscore doj. What we are trying to do here, we are trying to validate the date of join, whether this date, whatever the date entered by the user, is available in the check table or not. If sy hyphen sub rc is not equal to 0, what do you mean by not equal to 0?
If
If the select statement
that
is
Value
statement is
is
wrong,
there
no, if select statement
somewhere.
is failed, not equal to
failed,
0 means select statement is failed. That means
failed.
whatever the value, whatever the input you are trying to pass here is not available in the check table. That means it's a invalid entry, right? Message enter valid value. What type of message we need to use? Type error message. Is everyone clear?
Yes, sir.
So this scenario doesn't make any sense because we don't use date for validations, right? In the next example, we'll see perfect example. Here also, like, what is the issue we have? We are not passing primary key, right? For this check table.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, usually when we are using select single, we should be able to pass all primary key in the where condition. For now, just we'll see this.
Sir, can we use in the first if statement only if we use else and this single statement, select single statement? Is it possible, sir?
Yes, we can use, but not else. Maybe, yeah. In else also we can use like this.
Okay.
Else means, what do you mean by else? Not
If not
initial,
the
right?
first statement, yes, sir.
If it is incorrect, first statement is failed, then it will execute the else part. If it is
Else part.
incorrect means is initial, the opposite one is not initial, right? Yeah, here also you can keep that statement, the else part.
Okay.
Okay. Keep the breakpoint, execute the selection screen. I'm not entering any value. F5. The first if statement is triggering is initial check and displaying the error message because there is no date. Let me enter some date, 26/01/2024. Execute. Now the first part will fail because it is not initial, right? There is some value. Now it is not initial. F5. The first one is failed. Then it comes into the second else part. F5. What is the sub RC?
4
4. Because the date, this date 0126 is not available in the
in the
table.
table.
Then
Okay.
your message will execute. Enter valid value. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Let me try another other date. The valid date. I think this date is available. Let me check. What is the sub RC now?
0.
0, sir.
0.
It means it's
That
available.
means it won't trigger the error message. Right? Clear? So two ways of validating. First one is validating whether there is any value or not. Second thing, if there is a value, is it a correct value or not? Is it a correct value or not? Okay. Do we need to validate only mandatory parameters or optional parameters also? Do we need to validate only mandatory inputs or optional inputs too?
Mandatory, sir. Only.
Yeah, for all mandatory inputs, what you need to check? Whether there is some value entered or not, right? This
Yes,
is
sir.
for all mandatory parameters. And if there is any value, validate, is it a valid value or not for mandatory parameters. First, you need to check, is there any value available or not? If there is a value, validate that value. Is it a proper value or not? That is for mandatory parameters. What about optional parameters? What do you mean by optional parameter? User may or may not enter the value because that is a optional parameter. User can enter the value or user can also skip that value if it is a optional parameter. In this case, how we validate? Do we need to do this first validation if it is a optional parameter? Is initial check? No, right? User may or may not enter the value. You should not raise a error message if there is no value. That's why this validation is not necessary for optional parameters, right? Yes
Yes,
or
sir.
no? What about the second validation? Is it required for optional parameters? Yes. When it is required, when user enters something in the optional parameter and that is not a valid value. If user does not enter anything, that's fine. You can leave it. You don't need to check anything. But in case user entered anything, then we need to validate it or not, even though it is an optional parameter.
Yes, sir.
We should not allow the incorrect value, right? Even though it is an optional parameter,
Yes, sir.
right? In this case, if user entered anything, then we need to validate that input. Otherwise, ignore. Okay, clear?
Yes, sir.
Now, we'll see more examples in the next session. For now, let's continue with the business logic. What is the event we use to write the
Sir,
business logic?
sir, at the selection screen,
We'll take questions
at
after this.
okay, sir.
Okay, what is the event we use to write the business logic?
Select statements.
Start of selection. Start of selection is the event we
Oh,
use to write the business logic, whatever the business logic, data selection or calculations, anything. In our
yes,
case,
sir.
select, I'll select all the data, select star from ZDemo, employee into table at the rate data, IT underscore EMP data, where emp id equal to, sorry, we have taken date of join, right, as input. If sy hyphen sub rc equal to 0, will display the output. Let's say all the user inputs are correct. User inputs are correct, no issue in that. But there is no value, there is no value or records available for that entry in the table. For example, we are taking department data as input. We are taking department data as input, department ID as input. But in the table, department is there in check table. It's a valid department, right? But no employees joined in that department. Department is there. That's a valid department. But as of now, no employees are joined in that department. In that case, can you find any entry in employee master data with the department ID? Can we find
No.
any entry with the department ID? If there is no
No
employee
issue.
joined in the department, no, right? But is it a valid department or not?
Sir.
It's a valid department. Department is valid, but as of now, there is no employee joined in the department. That's why in employee master data, there is no entry for that department, right? There is no employee with that department ID. That means is it a error? No, right? That's not a
Not.
error. There is no data
Yes,
for
sir.
that entry. Inputs are correct, but there is no data for that entry. In that case, how can you display the messages? If sub rc is not equal to 0, message no data, type what type of message? That can be a status message or a information message. I, right? That's not a error, right? You have entered the input. That is a valid input because that is available in check table, but there is no data created for that value in the relevant table, in that relevant transactional table, right? Clear? Display the output. If it underscore emp data is not initial. Not initial means what?
There is a value.
There is some value, there is some record in this internal table. Then only display the output, right? Is everyone clear on this? Let's
Yes, sir.
execute the program. It's a valid entry and there are two records available in the table for this date of join. Let me enter some different date. If we enter different date, we have added a validation here, right? If the date is not available in the table, it will raise error message. It won't let you execute a date which is not available in the table. Actually, this is not a proper validation. Just take it as an example, okay? Because we don't validate on the same table, right? Whatever the table we are using for data selection, we write validations on the check table, right? In the next session, we'll see one more example. We can see more options available in the validations and events. So events are very important, everyone. So please practice using the events. You should maintain in the same sequence. Sequence of the events are very important. Okay. So when the initialization event will execute, before
Yes,
displaying
default
the,
values.
Default
Or
when it will execute, before displaying the,
selection.
before
let me
displaying
keep a
the
breakpoint in
initial
all the
state.
events. Let me keep a breakpoint in all the events. One breakpoint at initialization, another breakpoint at selection screen, another breakpoint at start of selection, and execute. I've executed the program. Is it displayed the selection screen? No, right? Before
No, sir.
displaying the selection screen, which event is executing?
Initialization.
Initialization.
Initialization. I pressed F5. I will enter the input. Execute. Next, what event should execute?
At selection
At
screen.
selection screen.
Controller is at selection screen. Next event is at selection screen. After at selection screen, which event will execute?
Start
Start
of
of selection.
Start of selection will execute. Okay.